You know, when we think about the civil rights movement, our minds usually jump to places like Alabama or Mississippi. But today, we're going to dig into some really powerful, often overlooked stories from South Carolina. Stories that didn't just change the state, but actually helped reshape the entire nation. Let's get into how they did it.
Seriously, what if the most game-changing strategies and legal battles of that whole era didn't start in the famous places we read about in textbooks? What if they started in small towns and cities in South Carolina? See, history isn't just made by famous leaders. It's forged by everyday people, parents, students, and workers, who just decide that enough is enough.
All right, so our first stop is a place called Clarendon County. This is where the fight for equality began. Not with a big march, but with a lawsuit aimed right at the heart of segregated schools.
This slide, wow, it really shows you just how much of a lie separate but equal truly was. I mean, just look at this breakdown. In 1949, white schools had dozens of buses. Black schools? They had none. Kids were walking for miles. White students got indoor plumbing and new textbooks, while black students were stuck with outdoor toilets and old, beat-up, handed-down books. This wasn't just unequal, this was a system designed to hold people back.
So, facing all of this, a group of incredibly brave parents decided to do something. Led by a man named Reverend J.A. Delane, they didn't just ask for buses, they demanded full equality. Filing this lawsuit, Briggs versus Elliott, was an unbelievable act of courage. I mean, think about the risk. Many people who signed on lost their jobs, their land. Reverend Delane himself had his house burned to the ground and was literally chased out of the state. They knew the danger, but they fought anyway for their kids' futures.
So the case goes before 3 judges. And while 2 of them ruled against desegregation, one judge, a white man from Charleston named J. Waddies Waring, wrote this incredibly powerful dissent. His argument was so simple, but so revolutionary. He said segregation is per se inequality. Now, per se is just a Latin phrase that means by itself. He was saying that the very act of separating people is inequality. You can't separate people by race and pretend it's equal. Those words would become the moral and legal foundation for everything that came next.
And you can see the direct line right here. The Briggs case from that small county was appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was then combined with 4 other cases, and it became the landmark case we all know, Brown versus Board of Education. So when the Supreme Court finally declared school segregation unconstitutional in 1954, they were actually using the logic from Judge Waring's dissent. A fight that started over a school bus in rural South Carolina led to the end of legal school segregation across the entire country. Just amazing.
But the fight wasn't just happening in the courtroom. On the ground, a whole new generation was getting ready to make their move. And in Rock Hill, South Carolina, a group of college students was about to completely change the playbook for how to protest.
They came up with this tactic called jail no bail. Now, before this, protesters would get arrested and civil rights groups would have to spend a ton of money bailing them out. But this new idea was genius. What if we refused to pay? What if we just served the time instead? This completely flipped the script. All of a sudden, the city was the one who had to pay to house and feed the protesters. It drained their resources and made the injustice impossible for the nation to ignore.
So here's how it worked. On January 31st, 1961, 9 students from Friendship Junior College, who became known as the Friendship Nine, sat down at a whites-only lunch counter. They were arrested, of course, and then sentenced to pay a $100 fine or serve 30 days of hard labor. They chose the hard labor. This wasn't just a protest. It was a carefully planned, courageous act of civil disobedience.
So why do it? Why choose a month of hard labor? Well, Thomas Gaither, one of the organizers, explained their motivation perfectly. He said this wasn't about getting famous or making headlines. It was a deeply moral stand. They truly believed their actions could help heal a country that was lost to the injustice of segregation.
And the impact? It was immediate. The jail no bail strategy just caught fire. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, one of the major national civil rights groups, urged students everywhere to adopt it. Later that same year, the famous Freedom Riders used this exact tactic, filling up the jails in Mississippi. A revolutionary strategy born in Rock Hill, South Carolina, became a signature of the national movement.
Okay, so the fight for civil rights was also a fight for economic justice. And in 1969 in Charleston, a whole new front in this battle opened up. And this time, it was led by a group of determined women fighting for their dignity in the workplace.
Nearly 450 hospital workers walked off the job. I mean, this was not a small protest. This was a massive strike that would bring the city to a standstill and get the attention of the entire country.
So, who were these strikers? Well, take a look. An overwhelming 90% were African American women. This was a movement led and for working-class black women, whose contributions to the fight for freedom are so often forgotten.
And it's so important to understand, this strike was not just about getting a bigger paycheck. It all started after 12 of their co-workers were fired for trying to organize a union. They were fighting for basic respect, for safe working conditions, and for a formal way to voice their complaints without being terrified of getting fired.
This question, which was written on a protester's sign, just gets right to the heart of their entire struggle. It was a plea for dignity, for recognition as human beings, and for the simple right to have a say in their own working conditions. The strike lasted for over 100 days, with support from national leaders like Coretta Scott King, and in the end, the workers won.
So let's step back. We've seen 3 different battlegrounds here: the courthouse, the lunch counter, and the hospital. Each one represents a different, crucial strategy in the exact same war for justice.
And this is the key takeaway, right? Real, lasting change didn't just come from one tactic or one group of people. It was the combined pressure from all these different fronts: the legal challenges, the student-led activism, and the demands for economic justice that forced the system of segregation to finally begin to crumble.
In 2015, more than 50 years after their protest, a judge officially cleared the records of the Friendship Nine. And the judge, whose own uncle had been the one to sentence those men, said this powerful line: "We cannot rewrite history, but we can write history." It's this incredible acknowledgement that past injustices can and must be corrected, and that the truth of what these heroes did deserves to be celebrated.
And that leaves us with one last question, a big one, because the fight for civil rights didn't just end in the 1960s. So what does it mean to write history where you live, today? What stories haven't been told? What work is still left to be done to make sure there's justice for everyone? It's a question those pioneers in South Carolina answered with their actions, and now it's our turn to think about it.